I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 107 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Before we begin, I would like to remind all members and other meeting participants in the room of the following important preventative measures. To prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incidents that can cause injuries, all in-person participants are reminded to keep their earpieces away from all microphones at all times. As indicated in the communique from the Speaker to all members on Monday, April 29th, the following measures have been taken to help prevent audio feedback incidents. All earpieces have been replaced by a model which greatly reduces the probability of audio feedback. The new earpieces are black in colour, whereas the former earpieces were grey. Please only use a black approved earpiece. By default, all unused earpieces will be unplugged at the start of the meeting. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for this purpose that you will find on the table as indicated where you're sitting. Please consult the cards on the table for guidelines to prevent audio feedback incidents. The room layout has been adjusted to increase the distance between microphones and reduce the chance of feedback from an ambient earpiece. These measures are in place so that we can conduct our business without interruption and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including the interpreters. Thank you all for your cooperation. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and a motion adopted on June 16, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of population sustainability of Yukon salmon stocks. Our first panel today we have from the Vontout Gwich'in First Nation, Chief Pauline Frost, and I apologise if I brutalised that name, but that's it. And as well, we have the chair of the Yukon Salmon Subcommittee, Mr. Tim Gerberding. Thank you for taking the time to appear. You will each have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement. Chief Frost, you have the floor first.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr.
Just a quick point of order or clarification. Can I ask the clerk if she received any indication from the minister that she will be coming in front of the committee in the coming weeks or months, please? Do you have any conversation or receive any emails regarding this, please?
Yes, I have received communication from the minister's office. She would be available on June 6th for 1 hour and September 26th for 1 hour.
Okay, thank you.
All right, back to you, Ms. Frost.
I turn my mic on. Is it controlled? Okay. Thank you for this opportunity. Appreciate presenting in person. I apologize for my last opportunity to speak to you via Zoom. I was away at the international treaty discussions on Yukon River salmon, and I couldn't make the call. So I am the chief of Vontout Gwich'in First Nation. It's a northern community in North Yukon. It's on the tributary of the Porcupine River and the Crow River. We are the farthest reaching community that the Yukon River salmon travel, so probably one of the longest migratory route of salmon in the world. And we are a remote nomadic people. We live solely on our subsistence way of life, although we are very progressive with respect to our interaction with the rest of the world. So my history is I worked, my previous to this, I was the Minister of Environment for the government of Yukon, so I've met numerous times with the federal fisheries minister. I also have sat on the Yukon River panel for many years. I sat as the chair of the Salmon Subcommittee, so presented recommendations to the federal minister with respect to salmon sustainability. 2013, the recommendations that came forward to the minister to cease and desist fishing on the Yukon River due to the decline and the challenges then of seeing 30,000 Chinook and not meeting escapement goals is critical. It's critical to my community. The community that I'm from is very small, 250 people. We live in harmony with the environment, so we are caribou people. So you might have heard of the Arctic Refuge and the 1002 lands and the protection of the porcupine caribou. And salmon is no different. We have our obligation to protect the resources is fundamental to our very existence. It's defined in our self-government agreements of which Canada signed on to. With respect to protection of land, environment, and our due diligence and our obligation to meet some of the climate strategies and climate goals. As a Minister of Environment for the Government of Yukon, I put forward our Clean Future, our targets for 2030 emission targets to meet and assist Canada in its objectives. But at the same time, we are talking about a potential species at risk. And I'll give you some numbers because it's critical to my community. 2 years ago, on the Porcupine River, we saw 349 Chinook pass my community. We have, in the last 10 years, not meet border escapement on the Yukon, more than 10 years, actually a decade or more, on the fishing branch chum. Yet we protected every bit of the habitat. Nianlianjik, which is the headwaters, is defined as a life-giving place. We protected it to allow the salmon to return to its critical habitat and spawning grounds. If you want to look at pristineness of environment, pristineness of water, you can walk down to the Porcupine River, dip your cup, and still drink the water. We have done our due diligence and our part to protect the environment. The circle of life starts with us, and it ends with us. And we've spoken about salmon as the last salmon to reach the spawning grounds. It's now every egg counts. Not every salmon, every egg counts. We've met internationally to meet border escapement requirements as defined in the Yukon River Agreement. That has not been very effective because there are no tools or mechanisms in the agreement to allow us to have deliberations around coexistence and co-management, true co-management of an iconic species that is at risk. My biggest concern is having a discussion in a year or two about a species at risk. How do we then bring the salmon back? Once you lose a wild stock, it's very difficult to bring that wild stock back to the tributary. So the population decline, climate change, adaptation, overharvesting, what we've seen in the pollock fishing industry, what we've seen with warming trending waters in the Bering Sea is affecting the salmon. We've seen ichthyophonus, we've seen the illnesses that the salmon contracts and obviously doesn't make it to the spawning grounds. We've studied it to death because I've been on the Yukon River panel now for 20-some years. We have a Restoration and Enhancement Trust Fund that looks at supporting the communities to look at scientific analysis. We have a Joint Technical Advisory Committee. How good has that been? How effective has it been? I ask myself that often as I sit at an international table with my colleagues. So this is the first time in our history that we've actually have an opportunity to speak about true stock sustainability, restoration, and maintaining, some form of support for the few fish that are swimming by my community.
Okay, Chief Frost, I'm going to have to cut it off there. We're gone well over the 5-minute mark, and hopefully anything you didn't get to say will come out with lines of questioning to you as we go. We'll now go to Mr. Gerberding for 5 minutes or less, please, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a real opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much. As Chief Frost mentioned, the Yukon salmon are in critical condition. Now, Chief Frost was speaking to the Porcupine, which is a major tributary of the Yukon. I was a commercial fisherman on the main stem for about 20 years, although there hasn't been any commercial fishing for 20 years. So this begins to date me. But as Chief Frost mentioned, the Yukon River Chinook salmon and chum salmon are in absolutely critical shape. Last year, less than 15,000 Chinook salmon reached the border, and the target escapement at that time was about 55,000. So that's just less than a third of the target, and the new target escapement is 71,000. But we're facing a catastrophic scenario, and what I want to say to begin with is that it's not going to be easy to fix. Chief Frost mentioned climate change. That's a huge issue, maybe the most challenging. You've got hatcheries in Asia and North America that are pouring literally 6 billion pink and chum salmon into the North Pacific that are competing with wild Yukon River Chinook for nutrients. That's a huge problem. A huge number of our Chinook are dying en route back to the spawning grounds because they're simply not fattening up in the ocean. They're not acquiring the accumulated fats, and they simply run out of gas on the way up the river. And this is a huge problem. The salmon that do come are much smaller and less robust than they used to be. We used to have a huge contingent of 7 and 8-year-old Chinook, some of the biggest in the world. As Chief Frost said, one of the longest, if not the longest, migrations in the world. The salmon that are coming back now are about half the size of the salmon that returned 30 years ago. So this is a real crisis. There are numerous causes. Climate change, hatcheries are some of them. And people sometimes throw up their hands and say, well, there's nothing we can do about that. I don't buy that line. I do agree it's going to be hard, but I think that Canada really needs to step up to the plate on the international stage and begin to lobby to reduce the number of hatchery fish being poured into the North Pacific and to begin to take steps to arrest climate change. But I want to address certain things that we can do. So as of April 1st, the government of Canada and Alaska, representing the USA, signed an important international agreement to press the pause button on Chinook fishing for 7 years and begin to rebuild to develop a rebuilding plan as required by the Yukon River Salmon Agreement. And that agreement identifies a number of factors that have contributed to the decline. We've discussed some of those, but one of the factors is resource development in both Yukon and Alaska. And most of the resource development that threatens our salmon is mining. There are also 2 hydroelectric dams in Yukon, both built 75 years ago. Neither was built with modern or effective fish migrating capability, fish ladders going up and fish out migrating channels going down. So we have opportunities to fix things here. And I think that one of the things we have to do is clarify responsibility and coordinate action between the government of Canada and the government of Yukon. Because at this moment in time, the government of Yukon more or less turns a blind eye to salmon. I'm not saying they do nothing, but they consider it Canada's responsibility. And, Canada defers to Yukon when it comes to land management in the Yukon Territory. And I think it's very important for the government of Canada to engage with your Yukon government colleagues and really get down to brass tacks on this Chinook rebuilding plan. At this moment in time, the Yukon government isn't very actively involved in it, but I think it's incumbent upon the government to engage with the Yukon government so that we have a multi-government initiative. We've also got the First Nation governments. Chief Frost was speaking about the Vuntagwitchin in Old Crow. There are 11 Yukon First Nations living along the Yukon River. Each of them has self-government powers and authorities to regulate the harvest of their own citizens. But I think that this is going to take a multi-government collaborative effort, and it's not going to be easy. I think what it's going to mean is that we're going to have to change regulations. It's going to cost money. It's going to mean sacrifice on the part of industry. But unless we're prepared to make some sacrifices and to take some bold and decisive action here, we're going to lose our salmon. So that concludes my opening remarks, and thank you for allowing me to speak, and happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Before I go to questions, I will remind members it might be easier if you identify who you're asking your question to. It'll make things go a little bit smoother. So we'll start off with Mr. Arnold for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank the witnesses for being here. We'll start off with Chief Frost, if I could. Thank you for bringing your vast knowledge to this discussion. In your knowledge, you spoke a lot about the size of the salmon that used to return up the river, and that you're not seeing the size of those fish returning any longer. Are you aware of any steps that are being taken to preserve the genetic strains of those large fish that no longer seem to be appearing?
Thank you. Thanks for the great question. With respect to what are we doing, we have essentially closed down salmon fishing in our communities for 30 years in some communities. That's our strategy. Our strategy is not. We've seen the numbers returning smaller returns, and the age is the age class returning at 4 years, not 7 and 8 years. So that we've seen a drastic decline over the last decade or more. So we've essentially imposed rules on ourselves as First Nations to not fish and not harvest, allow the spawners to get to the spawning grounds, and with the objective that we will, in time, allow the salmon to return as larger, healthier fish. But like Tim indicated, we're small in comparison to the rest of the Yukon River. It's a huge tributary, 60-some communities along the river, and then we only have a small number of communities in Yukon, 11 self-governing First Nations. We control our own rules of law that govern us, and so we impose restrictions on ourselves. We did.
In your time, I believe you said you were Minister of Environment with the territory, or in that time, were you aware of any work between the territorial government and Department of Fisheries or the federal government on preserving the genetics of those large fish that are so important to those strong runs?
Okay, thank you. I would suggest that the Yukon government and the Department of Environment is really responsible for critical habitat and freshwater fish. Federal government has a responsibility for the Chinook salmon. We have an international agreement. We have worked with the First Nations. We partnered with First Nations on projects and initiatives to protect critical habitat. So I would say to some regard we have. Did we go far enough? Maybe not. Maybe we could have done more. I would suggest that we need to bridge that relationship more and into the future, particularly now.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask the same question to Mr. Gerberding if you could provide any insight you have on that. We know that those large fish are so important because they not only produce more eggs, but they produce larger eggs, which have a better chance of survival all the way down the road. Are you aware of any programs or work that's been done to preserve those stocks?
Well, as Chief Frost mentioned, Yukon First Nations have drastically reduced and in some cases ceased their fishing for many, many years. And those at the headwaters have really taken the lead. The Teslin Tlingit Council at the upper end of the main stem are a particularly good example of that. But I want to say this about the genetic stocks and the genetic preserving the genes. The only way to do that in terms of Yukon River salmon, these big, 7, 8, and in some cases even 9-year-old fish, is to conserve the wild fish. I think that there is a little bit of a misconception about, the ability of science and particularly hatcheries to preserve genetic stocks, but that really isn't the way it works, unfortunately. There is a compensation hatchery attached to the Whitehorse Dam. The Whitehorse Dam is literally 3,000 kilometers up from the mouth. It's or maybe 2,800. It's a long way from where the salmon enter the mouth, and there is a 75-year-old fish ladder there that isn't particularly effective, lots of mortality associated with that. But the Yukon Energy that operates the dam does harvest wild stocks and has an incubation facility and releases quite a number of hatchery fish into the river. Now, when they release those fish, they clip the adipose fin, and so they're instantly recognizable. But what we have noticed is that those hatchery fish that return to the Whitehorse facility or beyond are markedly smaller and markedly thinner than their wild cousins. And so I think that, hatcheries seem like an easy answer sometimes, and they may very well play a role in preserving salmon, but they will not play a role in preserving the genetics of the big fish. I think the only way we're going to preserve those genetics is, eliminate the fishing and make it possible for those big fish to get back to the spawning grounds. Yukon River salmon are unique. They're among the biggest Chinook in the world. They have among the longest migrations. And it's the wild fish that have those very precious and unique genetics. To preserve those genetics, we've got to preserve the wild fish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much to both of you for appearing. It's really good to see both of you. And Chief, it's really nice to see you here in person. And I'm glad that could work out. I have a few questions for you. I'll try to be fairly specific. But you mentioned in your opening comments 349, I think, Chinook passed your community on the Porcupine this last year. What would be, can you compare that to previous years, and what would a peak year have looked like in older days?
Yeah, well, I'll age myself by telling you that I am 60 years old. I grew up on the Porcupine River. I grew up fishing. So I know what it was like when I was a child and the abundance of salmon that we've seen compared to where we are now. And as a minister responsible back in the day, and then as a chair of the salmon subcommittee, putting restrictions on my people was probably one of the most difficult things I ever had to do. So the amount of fish we've seen historically, as the story goes, Tim just described the biggest fish in the specific stocks, right? The stocks that we've seen, numbers are so small. The fish are returning smaller. We're seeing 3- and 4-year-olds. That's unusual. You don't send, the fish doesn't leave the spawning ground and then go off to ocean and come back 3 years later. Historically, we've seen them returning at 7 and 8 years, which tells a lot about the changing environments, which is there's no explanation. No one can explain that to us. Now, with regards to numbers, we fly in fish. Unfortunately, last year was the first time in our history we actually had to buy fish out of BC and fly it into our community so we can keep the culture alive. And that's what we've done. And it's unfortunate, but we want to keep the culture, salmon culture alive, and we want to keep, educating our young people about the importance of preserving the wild stocks and the genetics.
Thank you. And just following up a bit on Mr. Arnold's question, and from Tim and his testimony really laid the foundation for this. This requires collaboration and partnership between all levels of government. And given your previous role as Environment Minister, what would you see now as the ideal collaboration between the at least three levels of government?
I would say that you have an agreement. It's called the Pacific Salmon Agreement. Out of that derives the Yukon River Agreement. You have the Self-Government Agreement, the Umbrella Final Agreement. Chapter 16 comes out of that. The Salmon Subcommittee is the main instrument of salmon management in the Yukon. Yet we have an international agreement that is not flexible. It is not flexible to allow for a discussion, deliberations on effective co-management. It is very restrictive, and its only obligation is to meet the border escapement requirements. Now that we have a partnership agreement through this international political diplomatic agreement. It allows Canada to fully participate in opening up the Yukon River Agreement. It allows Canada to participate internationally on, the pressures of the Bering Sea, what's happening in Russia, what's happening with the harvesting and the migration of the salmon further and further north. And it also allows us to have discussions around how we collectively are responsible as three parties of government, First Nations, self-governing First Nations, Yukon government, and Canada, to collaborate in Canada on a stock restoration initiative. We need the resources in the Yukon right now. $654 billion is allocated from Canada. Where does it all flow? It flows into BC for the Pacific Salmon Agreement. How much of that flows to the Yukon on a restoration and enhancement initiative and preservation? Nothing. First Nations receive $0, yet we put all of our efforts into protecting, preserving critical habitat, and we do our part, and we need Canada to participate effectively and into an approach of building and bridging this relationship. It's critical. It's essential.
So if we were to just bring that one step further in terms of what would the mechanism for, you're really talking about a broad engagement, Canada, U.S., with self-governing First Nations. What would the format or the mechanism be? Like, is this something like a summit, a kind of another agreement over and above the existing treaty? What form would it take?
Well, I would suggest that that the tools there, right? This new agreement that was just signed, just stopping for a minute to think about what does the 7-year moratorium look like. That in itself won't return the fish to the spawning grounds. We have to have a broad discussion around the impacts and effects that we are seeing from climate, predation, illnesses, warming waters, warming trends, everything that's affecting the salmon. This is one opportunity that we have to get it right. And what does that look like? This is the first time we've ever pushed an agreement, political agreement, diplomatic interventions like this. And now the window of opportunity is open for Canada, and it's not restricted by the Pacific Salmon Agreement and the confines of the agreement that only allows you to meet a border escapement at the low end of the range, which is 42,500. That won't get you the salmon to return to its original wild stock state.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. You're very, very interesting. I just want to make an introduction here to let you know that at Bay St. Paul, I saw a film last weekend. It was called The Ocean Seen from the Heart. In watching it, I realized that we cannot advance or control, no, that's not the right word. Our interventions will not be positive if we do not, if the human being does not feel that he is part or she is part of the ocean itself. It's a magnificent film by Marie-Dominique Michaud. It's a French film, but it is translated into English. It's a Quebec film. It's gone around the world. And in that film, Mario Ciel, he was a diver that I have known for many years, and I'm sure Mr. Cormier, my colleague, knows him well. From Ile Morissette, he's appeared here. Hubert Reeves, who is a proponent of global humanity. And this beautiful, beautiful picture, this planetary picture, where you see efforts to rebuild and to recover the natural order. Chief Frost, I know what you are saying. It resonates because you see that particular perspective. So here is my question. You talk about preservation. We probably are working in two ways to restore the natural order. I prefer to use that term rather than the stock recovery. It's more natural, it's more environmental, and it reflects the whole marine environment. So in that perspective, there are two things that are at play: preservation, of course, but also our relationship with fossil fuels. So I'd like to hear you on the amounts that are being used to prevent the extinction of certain species, marine species, versus what is being done in terms of creating even greater pollution. So, in a word, should there be a proportion of the investment that's being made? Should it be increased to protect the natural order of things and diminished in terms of fossil fuels and their usage?
Back to just some options. So climate adaptation, impacts and effect on the environment. I want to just say that Vantaquichan is sitting on the richest oil and gas reserve in North America. We're one of the nations in the Yukon that has select lands called Category A lands, so we have surface and subsurface rights. You will never see any mineral development. You will never see any mining development on our Category A lands. The elders have advised that we protect it. You look at your climate strategy and the goal of meeting, your targets by 2030. In the specific agreements that Canada has, it also speaks about the need in moving forward to protect 30% of the landmass by a specified time. We have all of that in Yukon. It's protected. It will contribute to Canada's targets. And I think that we are working collaboratively with Canada to address that. We have the pristine areas of protection already across the Yukon. Sure, we've highlighted, and Tim has highlighted the pressures from the two hydro dams, but also mining is a huge pressure. We have legislation in effect in Yukon that is attempting to govern what our relationship looks like with the environment and protecting of the environment. It's important that we look at land use plans, land use measures, and outcomes in the Yukon. And that's a part of our agreement. So Canada has a broader obligation to Yukon as well, to Yukon First Nations, to effectively implement the land use strategies that will protect some of these areas that we speak about.
Can you speak to the control? You have referred to the reference that the control that you have over your lands. Can you perhaps explain that in terms of other sectors in Canada where they are more fossil fuel based? How could it be better done to protect the land there?
I wouldn't speak for the rest of Canada, but I will speak for the Yukon. We are 11 self-governing First Nations. We have fundamental rules and laws that apply to us that governs our way of life. We have signed off on 28 chapters of an agreement that clearly puts in place tools and measures that allows us to advance our interests. And the interest that we hold is always, first and foremost, protecting our way of life before anything else. And when we see the Yukon River Chinook salmon, the coho salmon, and the Chinook salmon on the Porcupine drastically declining, and we are now having a discussion on species at risk, and that's a conversation we will have with Canada and with our partners. And it breaks my heart to have to speak that way, but that's the reality. We have done absolutely everything. Yet at the same time, climate is affecting our environment and our land. If you look at Nianlianjik Park, you look at the Fishing Branch wetlands, we have what is referred to as dewatering. The salmon get to the spawning grounds, the headwaters. The water disappears over the course of the winter. The eggs do not, and the fry do not spawn and return. What happens? Climate is affecting us no matter how much you protect the environment or what you do. But it's a reality that we have to face collectively. And it's a conversation we need to have internationally.
Thank you, Madam Debian. We'll now move on to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. My first questions are to you, Chief Frost. I wanted to build off some of the things that you were talking about. You'd mentioned around the decision for your community to close down fishing, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about, you've spoken quite eloquently around the connection between salmon and the way of life of First Nations and the 11 self-governing First Nations within the Yukon. I'm wondering if you can speak to the impacts on First Nations way of life that the closure of this fishery has had, and how it contrasted before that closure was necessary to happen.
Thank you. Thanks for the great question. Well, if you can imagine taking a lollipop away from a child, you're taking something away from the community that they've enjoyed for millennia. At the same time, we have put in place the tools that allows us to control outcomes that are necessary for the better good of humanity, the better good of our community. We have been in North Yukon taken things to unprecedented levels. For the first time last year, we closed down all freshwater fishing, any type of gill net fishing in our tributary. That was not easy, I can tell you as a chief. It was not easy for me to do that, but we also looked at the step that we took set precedence because we used the tools in our self-government agreement that allowed us to put the laws in effect. So there's sections in our agreement, 16.4.2, 16.5.1, 13.3.3.4, which is the administration of justice tools to implement measures to protect and conserve. Before anything else, conservation is of the utmost priority for my community. And this is traditional knowledge, the practices of our historical people. When we speak scientific knowledge and trends, we need to incorporate the knowledge of the people. It will go and resonate a long way from the headwaters to the ocean, to the 60, 70 communities along the river, all Indigenous people, and it will resonate conservation before the rights of one individual, the rights of a people, so that we can, for 7 generations from now, still see salmon returning, wild stocks returning to our tributaries.
Thank you so much. There's a lot that can be learned from everything that you just said there in all the practices of how we move forward in protecting this vital keystone species that is so important to so many. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more. You had spoken about in your opening testimony about the illnesses that salmon are contracting, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more around some of those, what you're seeing as far as the illnesses that are that you're seeing washing up on the shore.
Thank you. I am not a scientist. I will tell you that now. I rely on my colleagues who are all scientists to give us the data and do the analysis for us. We've heard, and I've sit on the Yukon River panel, so we hear a lot of testimonials and we hear a lot of reports on ichthyophonus, which seems to be the new trending illness that the salmon contract on the way, and it appears that it comes from the warming temperatures and the warming waters, which means they don't make it to the spawning grounds. It's not harmful to humans. The salmon are still edible. However, we don't know a whole lot about that, but what I can say is that the assessments and the scientific assessments that are being done last year was huge for us in Yukon because United States decided that they were going to take some 500 Chinook out of the main stem tributary to do studies on ichthyophonus, and the results of the studies will not bring the salmon back. So we cannot continue to do scientific analysis on salmon. And I think this 7-year moratorium will allow us a huge window of opportunity to look at the trends that we're observing, whether it would be through illnesses or over-harvesting, warming temperatures. We have data loggers all along the river that tells us, we have telemetry sites along the river, we have sonars along the river that still does not give us the answers. So the question that you ask is a question that I cannot answer because there are many factors implicating the salmon, the demise of the salmon.
Thank you. You provided a lot of really valuable information, though, in that discussion, so I appreciate that. I'm going to ask a question, my last question, it looks like, to Mr. Gerberding. If you can, thank you for being here, and my question is perhaps a quick one, but you were talking about the hatcheries and the fins being clipped, making them highly recognizable. Can you clarify if you're aware if the fins of all the fish coming out of the hatcheries are clipped, or if it's just a certain percentage of the fish that are being clipped, and how that plays into this? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, yeah, I forgot to unmute. Yeah, no, not all of them are clipped, but a high percentage are. And so I guess, that the concept is that you assume that the clipped fish reflect the same characteristics as other hatchery fish. But no, not all of them were clipped. A high percentage were, however. And if I could just take the opportunity to say something about climate change and efforts to conserve lands in the Yukon, as Chief Frost said, the Yukon First Nations are really strong on conservation. I mean, they're trying to preserve the way of life, but I think it has to be stated that in Yukon, only 8% of the land is settlement land. The other 92% is non-settlement land. And so the government of Yukon is responsible to manage that 92%. And the government of Yukon simply isn't doing a really good job of managing salmon habitat. Somebody asked about climate change and efforts to reduce fossil fuel. Well, the government of Canada has a carbon tax, for example, and it's been very controversial. What happens in Yukon is that the Yukon government rebates to mining companies all of the carbon tax that they pay. I live in Dawson, Yukon, which is where the Klondike Gold Rush happened, and it's 95% of the placer mining in Yukon happens in the Dawson region. And those placer miners are the biggest polluters in Yukon, at least on a per capita basis, yet they're paying absolutely no carbon tax. It just doesn't make sense. They're releasing huge amounts of fumes, carbon, into the atmosphere. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans is responsible for managing salmon, but they have delegated that responsibility when it comes to so-called Yukon placer authorizations, which gives placer miners the right to literally relocate a salmon stream, mine it out, and then put it back where it was on the assumption that it will continue to be good salmon habitat. That's never really been proven. But the point I'm trying to make is that DFO needs to start to get tough with the government of Yukon. The government of Yukon doesn't care much about salmon. I mean, they like to pretend that they do, but they're not taking any action whatsoever. And as I said in my opening comments, if we're going to bring back the salmon, we're going to have to start doing things differently. You cannot promote mining and then give the miners back the carbon tax so they can continue to spew all this carbon into the atmosphere. It just doesn't make sense. There's also lots of habitat that's being destroyed. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, it's gone way over the time that Ms. Barron was allotted. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my first question is going to be to Chief Frost. The Yukon River is 2,300 miles long. 1,400 miles of it is basically in the U.S. territory, and 900 miles of it are in Canada. Now, we've got a witness. Sorry. Yes. So we've got some quotations from yourself here in the CBC. The agreement will only work if everyone does their part along the whole length of the river. If that happens, she said, everyone will benefit. That's your quotation. So do you think that you're going to have the agreement working on the whole length of the river?
Well, I would suggest that we have been doing this work now for well over 20 years. We have a relationship with the Alaska Association of Village Presidents. We have a relationship with the Tana Chiefs Conference. We have built a relationship with the tributaries. In fact, this summer, we have a delegation coming to my community from the United States or from the state of Alaska to come into my community to really just to see what it's like to come into an isolated community in the Yukon. It's an educational opportunity. We have built regional salmon management plans that we've shared with the various communities along the way. I signed off on the Intertribal Fish Commission as part of Canada's obligation in our relationship with the United States tribes. So we have a long ways to go, but we also know that the tribes and the isolated communities in the state of Alaska are identical to my community. Half of my community lives in Alaska. The numbers that we have for our self-government agreements, half of my citizens are across the border. They are United States citizens. They will comply. They will be advocates. They will advocate for closures. They have advocated for closures.
Thank you, Chief Frost. Chief Frost, how's the enforcement of the law on the Yukon River? Is there any IUU fishing or poaching taking place? How strict is compliance with the law on the river?
I would say that compliance, and at least from my perspective, is the First Nations self-regulate themselves, so they control. And with respect to enforcement, we have not one DFO fisheries officer in the Yukon, so we regulate and manage ourselves. They moved all of the enforcement agencies out of territory. We've requested, this morning I requested from the Regional Director General, presence in my community.
So, but Chief Frost, going back to the statement that you said, the agreement will only work if everyone does their part. We need that kind of enforcement on the U.S. part of the river, given that just about 2/3 of it runs through the U.S. What kind of a commitment have you received from the United States that they'll watch the poaching that's happening on their side of the river?
We have commitment from Governor Dunleavy that has indicated he signed off on the agreement. He negotiated the agreement in good faith with his colleagues at the Yukon River panel, the tributaries. We met just a month ago, and we have full-on commitment from our colleagues across the way. So we have commitment from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game to monitor and enforce, much like
Chief
Canada
Frost,
does.
how was it in the past leading up to where we are today?
Well, I would say that I will not speak to what happened in the United States, but I will say that we understand that there may have been pulse opening and closures in Alaska, and there may have been fishing that may have happened outside of the pulse opening and closures with when there was salmon restrictions and fishing put in place. So,
thank you, Chief Frost.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of questions for Mr. Gerberding. Mr. Gerberding, I heard you mention that you were once a gillnet fisherman on the Yukon River. What do you think the effect of netting a river could be? I'm from Newfoundland, and it's unheard of to net a river in Atlantic Canada. It's just not done. So what do you think the effect of gill netting that river has been over the years? And if the salmon return, will you return to gill netting?
Thank you for the question. There's no doubt but that gill nets select for the larger fish. So the effect of gill netting on the river, and I should say that it is the most common way of fishing on both sides of the border, has been to selectively weed out the larger fish. So that is a factor. I don't imagine I'll ever return to fishing. It'd be great if my kids would. I don't think gill netting would be appropriate at this moment in time. It's too selective for large fish. But I think that it's probably going to take a generation or more to rebuild the fish. But to answer the question about gill netting, it does take out the big fish for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes to finish out the first hour.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for our witnesses for being here. Chief Frost, just remind me, your community is on the Porcupine tributary, is it?
That's correct.
Okay. And you're saying that obviously you've noticed that the fish returning are smaller, younger, and not as plentiful. Are there measurements being done at the mouth of the Yukon River, that is on the Alaska side, the Bering Sea? Do those same kind of ratios or same phenomena exhibit at the mouth of the river, i.e. the size of the fish, age of the fish, and numbers of the fish? I mean, is the decrease and the conditions that you've seen, are they fairly even up and down the whole system?
I would venture to say not. I think that if you look at the headwaters, at the mouth of, there's plenty of salmon and other species coming in, so huge opportunities. The fish are managed in zones. They're managed through 5 different zones in the state of Alaska, and they're regulated up the tributary. And if they come in abundance at the mouth of the river, and there's a target to reach border escapement, they will fish and fish and fish until they hit a specific zone and pass the sonar that will detect that the numbers are dropping, and then they'll cut off the fishing. Oftentimes, it's in the headwaters, the zone that starts to hit up to Canada, Eagle River being the last sonar on the Yukon River. So the question, we're seeing plenty early on, but of late, I think we've detected that the salmon are just not returning as they have historically.
Well, they're not making it that far.
They're just not making it that far.
Okay, so the new agreement, it's this, 7-year moratorium on fishing all up and down the river?
That's correct.
Do you think that's going to make a difference?
I think that in itself is not going to make a significant difference. I think there's so much more that we have to do in terms of co-management, collaboration, and really clearly coming up with a stock restoration plan. How are we going to restore the stocks to its traditional, natural, wild stock genetics? The 7-year moratorium itself is not the answer.
Okay. Mr. Gerberding, the Yukon-Alaska rebuilding plan, there is a Yukon-Alaska rebuilding plan in place, is that correct?
No, there isn't. But one is going to be developed. The Yukon River Salmon Agreement, signed back in 2001, requires the parties to develop a rebuilding plan when stocks aren't meeting their escapement targets. That's happening now, and the 7-year agreement that's being referenced requires the parties to develop a Chinook rebuilding plan. That is not in place now. I should add that separately, there is a requirement in Canada now to develop a rebuilding plan. This is a domestic plan for Chinook salmon, because the Yukon River salmon are in the process of being listed as a major species under the Fisheries Act.
Well, sir, I'm sorry, I have to. I only have limited time here. So,
sorry.
But basically, until things get settled to the positive on the Alaska side of the border, anything we do upriver is going to be pretty darn limited in terms of its effectiveness, right?
Well, yeah, we can't do it alone. I think that everybody has to work together. I think that the Alaskans, have certainly not been innocent, but I think they read the writing on the wall like all of us. They realize we've got to work together now on both sides of the border to save the salmon.
Okay.
But yeah, we can't do it alone.
Chief Frost, you mentioned that the porcupine is basically pristine. You've not allowed development. What can you comment on the habitat, the status of the habitat, where it meets the Yukon River and through to the Bering Sea? Have there been challenges to habitat through the Alaska zone?
As I sat at the Yukon River panel, the question came up around mining and impacts and effects of mining. So if you Google and you search, it's all there. The evidence is there with respect to mining and impacts and effects of placer industry or quartz industry in the United States. So I would venture to say yes. There's, in Canada we have in Yukon we have the YESAP legislation that puts in place some rules that apply to us. United States, maybe not so.
Right. I am out of time. Thank you.
Thank
you, Mr. Hardy. That concludes our first hour of testimony with the witnesses, but the two witnesses that are here now are willing to stay for the next hour as well. So we're going to suspend for a moment just to do a sound check with the new witness that's joining us as well for this last hour. So we'll suspend for a moment while that takes place. Welcome Chief Frost and Mr. Gerberding just for staying on for the extra while. And we'll also welcome from the Quebec Federation of Atlantic Salmon, Marion Bergeron, Director General and Biologist. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. Ms. Bergeron, you will have 5 minutes or less for your opening statement. You have the floor. When you're ready.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes, thank you. I'm very happy to see everyone today. In fact, I was invited to testify to the management of the Atlantic salmon in Quebec. It's a management model that is asymmetrical and which has been promoted by not-for-profit organization to be able to enhance the value of salmon fishing, but also to conserve the salmon stock. I think that this could be an inspiring model, and I'm sure that there are dimensions that could be added to it. So it's a model that the provincial government has established for the Atlantic salmon. They identify the level of health of the rivers, and they also provide for recreational fishery in these areas. So there is funding that is reinvested directly in the conservation of our habitats, but it also means that there are many organizations everywhere that come to observe and take samples, all types of scientific sampling that will be helpful in ensuring the healthy management of salmon. It also allows us to provide for quite a variety of activities that are affected actually by climate change. I'm speaking about the conservation of rivers, the use of ecosystemic processes that are healthy, but also that will ensure that there is ample drinking water, clear and clean water sources. Other climate elements that may well arise in the future are of import as well. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what I wanted to say, to be able to present to you this other system that could be used as a possible solution where it could be applied elsewhere in Canada. I've heard stakeholders that are involved in the healthy management of the Atlantic and the Pacific salmon stock that are interested in it. And of course, the Government of Canada has a role to play to be able to support this initiative, which ensures healthy participation of citizens, of fishers, and many other organizations at the local level. It's really something that is totally decentralized. And that's it.
Now go to our first round of questioning. Mr. Small, for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've got another question for Mr. Gerberding to start off. Mr. Gerberding, you mentioned that you're not in favor of hatcheries for salmon enhancement. You know, we've got a river in Newfoundland, Labrador called the Exploits River that was at one point had a population of 5,500 in the early 90s, and now it's back with 30 or 40,000 a year. So that's proof right there that enhancement works. Why, like, with the technology that's out there, and it's proven, and genetics is being used in the hatcheries, especially in British Columbia rivers, it's very high tech. Do you think that the hatcheries just simply failed on the Yukon River?
Thank you. I'm not opposed to hatcheries. As I said, I think hatcheries may have a role to play, but the Yukon River Salmon Agreement itself contains very clear direction to concentrate on the wild stocks. So artificial propagation is not an excuse for poor management. From what I've observed, and I don't claim to observe, but I'm not aware that hatcheries are particularly successful at producing large Chinook salmon. Certainly the observations we've had in Yukon suggest that the hatchery fish are considerably smaller. I'm not sure we're at the place where we have to revert to hatcheries. I guess that I think we're almost there, but I think that as per the Yukon Salmon Agreement, the first efforts have to be made to preserve the wild stocks. If that doesn't work, then obviously we're going to have to go to hatcheries.
Thank you very much. You mentioned the effect of mining on the rivers out in the Yukon. So, where would you place the blame, and what would you like to see going forward in terms of control over what's happening in the mining industry?
Yeah. So okay. I don't necessarily want to place. So the Yukon Placer Mining Act came into effect in 1906, and it's essentially unchanged since that time. Under the Yukon free entry system, miners can stake claims virtually anywhere, not on First Nation land, but virtually anywhere else. And there is a very strong connection between the right to work and the right to locate. In other words, once you stake a claim, you've got very strong rights to proceed to mine that claim. And I think that, that arrangement has disappeared in many parts of the world. I don't think that's appropriate in 2024, in the 21st century. I think that, yes, there's a lot of money to be generated mining gold, but other than that, what benefit does it provide to society? I think that if we're going to save our natural resources, we've got to begin to prioritize conservation above making money.
So I'm sure that you've, Mr. Gerbing, have heard about the success in Washington and Oregon that the rivers there have had in bringing back their steelhead and salmon populations, with some work that they've done to make better waterways or better access around the hydro dams. The reports are coming out, and they're pretty good, in addition to some harvesting of pinnipeds. So do you think that those two factors could have quite a bit to do with the decline that you've had there, predation by pinnipeds and the hydro dams? Is there work that can be done by the hydro people to make things better?
Well, absolutely, there is, and I'm not aware of really successful Chinook salmon hatchery programs. Maybe I'm simply unaware, but just to say that the Whitehorse Dam was built 75 years ago. They're up for relicensing. There's a similar dam on the Mayo River, which is an important Chinook spawning river, now the Mayo Dam has simply extirpated all of the salmon that used to spawn above it, which I understand was quite a bit, according to the National done. There was absolutely no allowance, no fish ladder built at 75 years ago, and no allowance for outmigrating. Of course, if the fish can't get up, they don't need to come back down. But I think that there are definitely ways to improve those facilities, and hopefully, as part of the dam relicensing, that will happen. So yes, that will happen. Is it going to be the panacea? I don't think so, but it can certainly help. And my view of the world is that at this point, we've got to do everything we can to save the salmon, because they're disappearing before our eyes here.
Yeah, so it might be worth your while, Mr. Gerberding, to check out what's happened on the Exploits River. They've got a big hydro dam there, and they've made great leaps and bounds in the last 20 years to revive the salmon stocks on the Exploits River, in addition to having a hatchery there for a number of years. Chief Frost, anything?
I'm going to cut you off there, Mr. Small, because you got 8 seconds left. You're not going to get your question out, let alone an answer. So we'll go on.
You can't get a break in that length time?
No. Well, there you go. We'll go now to Mr. Hanley for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thanks very much. Tim, I'll go back to you. So could you, and I'm going to try to be very short with questions and answers, but you mentioned improving the facilities when it comes to the dams. We know this is much under discussion, especially with the relicensing. But when you say improve the facilities, could you give one or two examples of what you would be recommending?
Yes, and on that, the Salmon Subcommittee hired expert assistants to help us make us. But I think that the turbines can be. There's a certain design of turbine that has been shown to be less damaging of salmon, and so I think that those could be replaced. I think that the spillway that exists right now just goes straight down. I understand you can build a graduated spillway that makes it easier for the fry to outmigrate, and I also think that the size and construction of the fish ladder can be substantially improved. I mean, like I say, it hasn't changed in 75 years, so there are technologies now that allow us to build a better fish ladder and I think a better spillway.
Thank you. And just to maybe change the subject slightly to the ocean, you mentioned, I think, 3 important factors: hatcheries, ocean temperature, and you did briefly mention pollock fishery and presumably bycatch. Can you talk about, like, if you were looking at a rebuilding plan that's international, how would you address any of these ocean factors, or could you?
Well, I think we can. No, I'm optimistic about that. And I should say, like Pauline, I'm on the Yukon River panel, and I can tell you that the Alaska members of the panel and Canadian members are really kind of speaking with a single voice when it comes to issues like hatcheries, climate change, and the pollock fisheries. So I think we've got a real opportunity for international cooperation through this 7-year agreement that's been signed. And I think that, that maybe we have to task some of the ministers to begin to do some international lobbying to reduce the number of hatcheries, for example. I think that those are the steps that we've got to take if we're going to save the wild Chinook salmon.
And on that note, certainly when I had the opportunity to go to Washington with members of the Salmon Subcommittee, as you know, and with Chief Tom, I thought the discussions were very productive, and I really see opportunity for a collaborative international approach. And I think, as Chief Frost, you said, this is the window of opportunity to build on the 7-year moratorium into a rebuilding plan. But Chief Frost, a couple of further questions for you. And you did mention us about the low water levels in the tributaries of the Porcupine, and I've even heard there was an article about so-called dewatering. Can you maybe talk a little bit about the dewatering and its like what is that? What effect does it have? How can you address that?
Okay. Already the fishing branch or Nianlianjik Park is unique. Now the river itself disappears for 5 kilometers and then it reappears. So it has high oxidity and it's the headwaters. So the salmon, it's a very unique ecosystem, and so in that regard, the temperatures and climate is changing two times faster than anywhere else in North Yukon, in the north, and we're seeing that on the river. We've seen low waters. We're seeing more forest fires in the area. Last summer we had 20 forest fires surrounding my community. We had to evacuate, which is an indication of how low the rivers were, and dewatering. Essentially, the water disappears, and the salmon are stranded. The salmon fry are stranded and won't reproduce. So, is that new? That's a new phenomena. We don't have an explanation, but there's a big work being done. Thanks to Canada for sponsoring Vantukuchen, and we'll see what the results are from that exercise. Doing some scientific analysis on that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Tim, I guess I have a little bit of time, but can you distinguish? In my understanding, there are two sort of basic types of hatcheries: more sort of commercial hatcheries, and then conservation, community-based hatcheries. Is that valid? And can you briefly elaborate on that?
Yes, I can. Thanks for that. So, well, I think that the two to do main. So there's at least 3. There the hatcheries that are pouring billions of fish into the North Pacific these are commercial hatcheries. I mean, most of the salmon that you buy in the grocery store these days is coming from fish that return to those hatcheries. And pink salmon are especially prolific. They grow very fast, so they're a favorite. You've also got what we refer to as a compensation hatchery at the Whitehorse Dam, which is to compensate for the damage they're doing to the wild salmon. And then there are conservation hatcheries. And these are, generally speaking, small hatcheries that are very specific and I guess you could say focused on a single stock. So if you knew, for example, I could use McIntyre Creek near Whitehorse, that this is a stream that at one time had a very prolific Chinook salmon return. Now there are practically none. So a conservation hatchery would seek to take brood stock, incubate them in a good place, and then plant them into McIntyre Creek for a cycle, which we will call 7 years, in hopes to kind of restart that run. But my understanding is that you've got to be very careful with that sort of hatchery, because those fish that are coming back from the hatchery, they have what are called epigenetic effects. The genes are actually affected, and if those fish start to breed with the wild fish over time and over several cycles, you can actually compromise the genetics of the wild fish. But conservation fisheries can be, I think, very effective in restoring the runs to over a short period, usually one cycle, for a specific stream. That's what I understand the conservation hatchery to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. We'll now go to Madame Devienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm very happy to have Madame Bergeron with us. Thank you very much for being here. It will give us an idea of what's happening in Quebec. And it's really fun that she's able to be with us today. So we have somebody from the other side of the country as well, and we can make comparisons. Madame Bergeron, earlier you said that there was decentralized decision-making. If you compare that with other situations. For example, the herring or the mackerel fishery. I'm not talking commercial, but other plans that the government has where one would say there was not so much an impact. But where you are, it's recreational fishery, so it wouldn't be a big impact, like an economic impact for commercial fishery. I'm sorry, yes. Well, no, we don't have a commercial salmon fishery in Quebec. It is a recreational or traditional indigenous fishery. But nonetheless, the framework that applies to the whole province allows us to be able to classify the various rivers, and that gives us the overview of what can be applied when you think in terms of a decision-making framework that could actually be applied to each of them. So there is a management ability and an organizational ability. They can work very democratically with the local communities to be able to participate in decision-making. But also, they can collect scientific data and share that same data with the others and also with the provincial government. So there is a great deal of flexibility at that level, which does have an impact on a specific river, on a given river. Here I'm speaking to conservation or recovery and restoring a specific stock. And also, earlier you were speaking about mining and aquaculture. Of course, the economic dimension is always important, but decisions have to be taken consistently and uniformly in keeping the ecosystems in mind. So these are many factors, of course. Well, I find this interesting because more there is management decision-making closer to the land, I would say that there is a better ability to proceed on a case-by-case basis. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. When you look at the issues that you have to deal with in terms of climate change and environmental impacts, those models that exist, which allow for a specific symmetry for each area. It's very important in terms of the philosophy of integrating our territories with what we are trying to effect here. You have to make the decision at the appropriate place to be consistent and uniform on a larger level, more universally. Oh, that's very interesting what you're saying. What do you think about aquaculture? I have two questions. What do you think about aquaculture, and what can that change in terms of the dynamic of your management of salmon rivers? And here's another question. The main threat to the salmon in Quebec. Tell me what it is. Well, with respect to aquaculture, I found that perhaps I won't be Mr. Tim because I can't pronounce your name. Mr. Tim, I found your testimony very interesting with respect to aquaculture that is intended for food purposes and versus conservation purposes. So, in the east of Canada, there is a major issue. There can be very significant impacts on the population, wild fish that can affect the commercial aquaculture. Now, with respect to the conservation angle, I think it's important to have structures that allow for decentralized decision-making, because things change. The situation is different from one locality to another. And therefore, the issue of sustainability for promoting a fish population will vary from river to river, and it's very difficult to maintain over time because you're talking about the health of the habitat itself, the connectedness of the habitats in terms of space and time. And each area has to have what is necessary for its health. Also, with respect to conservation, we want to have an impact through seeding that will be positive, genetically positive for a specific population, which will allow for us to better deal with it. So,
Well, Madam Debienne, your time has gone over. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our newest witness who is here today. And perhaps, Madame Bergeron, I'll give you the opportunity to just finish your sentence of what you were trying to say there, and I'll go to my first question. So if you wanted to finish what you were saying, I'm perfectly happy for you to do that.
Merci. Thank you. It's very simple and no surprise when I say the main threat for the salmon population is climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Madame Bergeron, are you noticing any particular viruses, or what are your observations as far as what you're seeing in salmon? Are you seeing the sizes decreasing? Are you seeing viruses? What information can you provide us as to what you're seeing on your end for us to be able to compare in the Yukon River?
Well, yes, if it's specifically in line with the establishment of aquaculture, I can say that it's very well documented. In eastern Canada, there are specific parasites and diseases that affect aquaculture, the lice, the salmon lice. But beyond that, there are other diseases like the infectious anemia, which is viral and very difficult to eliminate in addition to the parasites. So that exists in eastern Canada.
Thank you. My other question is, perhaps I'll loop back to Chief Frost, and if Chief Frost is still here. I can't see. I think she is. And to Mr. Gerberding, a theme in some of the testimony that you provided today is around the problematic ways in which decisions have been made in the past and continue in many ways today of the siloing of responsibility between different levels of government, perhaps also not taken into account First Nations rights, First Nations knowledge, and traditional ways of being. Chief Frost, could you provide some further information around the importance of, as Mr. Gerberding mentioned, we have to be doing things differently, around the importance of having all levels of government, in particular the Government of Canada, looking at less silos and more interconnected responsibility to ensure that we are addressing the emergency at hand?
Thank you. Really great question. I mean, if you look at the mandate letter to the Minister of TFO, it talks about the mandate to look at better integration of traditional knowledge into planning and policy decisions. It speaks about collaboration of fisheries arrangements, Indigenous knowledge keepers. We speak about, meeting climate obligations. That's a relationship that has to be built, a gap that has been missing historically, but truly an obligation to develop a collaborative conservation strategy. A lot has been done already. We have our agreements. We've celebrated 30 years of signing our self-government agreements, 50 years of our umbrella agreement, final agreement. We've set the high water mark. This is a huge opportunity for us to continue to collaborate with the minister. The mandates are the same in the minister's mandate letter, but also in the context of our self-government agreement and the international agreement. And now we have this moratorium and the political agreement. It's a huge window, as I said. We have to look at it all and make it work and take best practices. We have not done that historically, so now's the time for us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Frost. Mr. Gerberding, do you have any additional thoughts that you wanted to add on this topic?
Well, yeah, a little bit. So I worked on the Trundick-Witchen final agreement, and there have been a number of cases about land use that have gone to the courts, but the Supreme Court has really confirmed that one of the major intents of the Yukon land claim is to provide Yukon First Nation people meaningful participation in the management of public resources. And of course, that includes fish, but I think the word that we oftentimes use is co-government and co-management. So I think it's really critical that First Nation values come to the forefront here and are respected. And I think, again, that means elevating conservation above economic interests.
Thank you very much. I'm just noticing I only have 30 seconds left, so I'm trying to think of the most important question to ask in those 30 seconds, but can agree more around the importance of conservation being taken before economic benefits. And this is something that I notice continues to be a theme in many areas. And so I think addressing that profits are not going to provide us with the sustainable and marine ecosystems that we require to ensure that First Nation rights are upheld, to ensure that coastal communities are thriving, to ensure that we have these stocks for generations to come. Can agree with you more on that. And with that, I just took up my 30 seconds without a question, but want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses. My first question is for Chief Frost. I was shocked when you said that DFO, CNP, Conservation Protection Enforcement, is not on the river. How long has it been since there has been any DFO enforcement on the river?
I can't answer that question, but I know they've not been there for a number of years. They've moved their enforcement agency to BC, and so we have no presence on the Porcupine or on the Yukon main stem.
So while we've seen a decline, obviously a dramatic decline over the years in the Pacific salmon stocks and their returns, that didn't alarm DFO obviously enough to put some resources into enforcement.
I would say not. I mean, you're seeing all the 650 whatever billions of dollars going into BC and none going into the Yukon. We have no enforcement in the Yukon. The decisions for the closures are left up to the Indigenous communities to implement enforcement measures ourselves, which is not fair because the self-government agreement sets parameters, but it also is Canada's obligation to participate equally in effective co-management.
So what level of enforcement resources have you asked for and that you'd like to see this committee recommend in its report?
Well, I would suggest that in a presence on the ground, you need to look at collaboration with the government of Yukon, Yukon First Nations in Canada. We all have an obligation, and taking a softer approach to management than an enforcement approach will get us a long way to collaboration and allowing then our participants in our communities to, do their part to preserve, protect, and conserve the few salmon that migrates by their community.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Mr. Gerberding, I hope I pronounced your name right. The Pink and Chum commercial farms you speak of, where are they located?
They're located, there are some in Canada, some in the United States, many in Asia. I understand that Japan and Korea have a number, and so does Russia.
Well, how would the treaty that's been signed and the moratorium address that issue? Because if all other things are fixed, as Chief Frost was alluding to, that it's not enough just to do a moratorium, how would that fix things when they're not included in that issue?
Well, that's an excellent point, and I think that has to be addressed. So I did send a copy of that 7-year agreement, and I know at one point someone mentioned it needed to be translated into French. I hope it has been, but if there are sections in that agreement that speak specifically to the rebuilding plan, and there are factors that have to be addressed that include climate change is one of them. Resource development is another. And again, this is both sides of the border. The marine interceptions, the pollock fishery, and hatcheries. I mean, hatcheries are specifically mentioned. And there's no blueprint for how this is going to happen. But I know that at the advisor level, where Pauline and I sit, I think that we would very much like to collaborate as governments and begin to approach all governments, including Canada and the United States, and just raise the issue and see if we can begin to at least moderate the number of fish that are being poured into the North Pacific, because it's not an infinite system, and the competition is definitely affecting the wild strains.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, with the indulgence, Mr. Chair, I elevated you to Speaker. With the indulgence of the Chair, I'd like to move a motion that we resume debate on the Elver fishery motion that I moved at the last meeting on April 18th, in addition to obviously the debate where I think we left off on the amendment of MP Kellaway to that motion, and that we resume that now.
Motion from Mr. Perkins. I don't know if you want to read out that motion again. You have to vote? Oh, I'm resuming debate. Okay, all right. So I'll ask the clerk to do a recorded vote.
Monsieur Cormier?
No.
Mr. Hanley?
No.
Mr. Hardy?
No.
Mr. Kellaway?
No.
Mr. Morrissey?
No.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Bragdon?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
Mr. Small?
Yes.
Madame Desbiens?
Je trouve ça dommage pour nos témoins, moi. Mais bon, un débat, mais pas à la fin, là, dans...
I think it's too bad for our witnesses if we have a debate. I don't know how to. I don't know how to say anything.
Yes is the easiest way.
Oui, oui, je dis oui.
I say yes. Yay.
Aaron?
Yes.
Six nays, 5 nays. 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Passed. So now do I say goodbye to the witnesses? All right, I'm going to say a thank you to our witnesses for today, for Chief Frost and Mr. Gerberding for staying for a full 2 hours, and for Ms. Bergeron for joining us as well in the last hour. So again, thank you to our witnesses. We'll let you sign off now while we go into debate.
Thank you.
Thank you again. And if there's anything you think you didn't get to say or put forward, you can certainly send an email to the clerk, and we'll make sure that's included in your testimonies. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. where that leaves us right now is we have to debate the amendments by Mr. Kellaway on that motion. Ms. Barron?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that we go to a vote on this particular motion.
Well, actually, you can't go to a vote on the actual motion because there was an amendment made to the motion, so we have to...
The amendment to the motion, thank you.
Oh, okay.
So before that, can you read like all the motion back and the amendment, like everything that was said, because it's like 2 weeks ago, so...
Do you want to read your motion aloud?
My original motion and then Mr. Kellaway, the amendment?
Yes.
I have the amendment too here, but...
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Can we just clarify? What I was speaking to was the amendment made by MP Kellaway. I believe that's where we are currently in the debate.
All right. Mr. Kellaway, can you read your amendments again?
Yeah, I just have to get a copy of it. I don't have a copy of it. If you can give me a copy of it.
So, in the interview, I know that MP Barron wants these, the amendment, but I think MP Cormier wanted to know both. So if you want, I can read the first one, and then when MP Kellaway reads the amendment, that's what the first vote will be on. So the original motion, which Mr. Kellaway amended, that I moved, was that regarding the Minister Diane Leboutilier's decision to close the legal Elver harvest of 2024, the committee finds that A, banning the illegal fishery does not stop poaching, B, closing the Elver fishery has not decreased criminal activity and violence in Nova Scotia, as evidenced by the witnesses who have come forward to the committee to detail continued violence and lawlessness in their communities, including arson, assault, and attempted murder. C, closing the Elver fishery has resulted in 1,100 job losses, harming the rural Nova Scotian communities and fishing industry as a whole, where Canadians are struggling with a cost of living crisis by this government. And D, the current DFO and RCMP enforcement efforts allocated by the minister remain insufficient and have not put a halt to the violence of poaching, and that these findings, the committee therefore agrees to report these findings to the House and call on the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard to immediately reopen the Elver fishery. And then I believe Mr. Kellaway, some way through, did an amendment to that.
Ready, Mr. Kellaway?
So I'll read this into the record again? Okay. Okay. So I'll discuss the changes, and you want me to read the whole amendment as is? Okay. So number one, by deleting A and replacing it with the following, that the Elver fishery is a unique public safety and law enforcement environment with considerations including Indigenous treaty rights to fish that complicate attempts to stop unauthorized fishing, end quote. Number two, deleting B. Number three, delete created by this government in bullet C. Number four, delete bullet D and replacing with the following. Quote, the Federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Provincial Ministers of Public Safety, Justice and Fisheries and Aquaculture are working hard in collaboration across jurisdiction to ensure that public safety is maintained in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick this Elver season, close quote. Number five, delete, quote, and call on the Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard to immediately reopen the Elver fishery, end quote, and replace it with the following. That this committee call on the government to accelerate the adoption of new regulations for the Elver fishery so that the 2025 season can open as scheduled, end of quote. So I'll read the full motion or amendment. That regarding Minister Diane Leboutilier's decision to close the legal Elver harvest of 2024, the committee finds that A, that the Elver fishery is a unique public safety and law enforcement environment with considerations including Indigenous treaty rights to fish that complicate attempts to stop unauthorized fishery. B, closing the Elver fishery has resulted in 1,100 job losses, harming rural Nova Scotian communities and the fishing industry as a whole when Canadians are struggling with a cost of living crisis. And D, the Federal Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Provincial Ministers of Public Safety, Justice, and Fisheries and Aquaculture are working hard and in collaboration across jurisdictions to ensure that public safety is maintained in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick this Elver season. And given these findings, the committee therefore agrees to report these findings to the House, that this committee call on the government to accelerate the adoption of new regulations for the Elver fishery so that the 2025 season can open as scheduled.
Chair, I was in the discussion when this adjourned the last time, but from a layman's perspective, observing from a distance, the steps that are currently being taken by the ministry, DFO and the minister.
Sorry, point of order, Mr. Chair. I just, with all respect to my colleague, I believe I did call for a vote on the amendment to the motion. And I believe that means we move to a vote.
Okay. All right. Suspend for just a moment. The clerk wants to advise me.